The sound of ripping denim echoed through the federal courthouse hallway like a gunshot. It wasn't just a jacket. It was a declaration of war. Sergeant Barrett Langford, a man they called the Hammer, stood towering over a quiet black woman, holding the shredded sleeve of her coat in his fist, sneering like he owned the building. He thought she was just another obstacle. He thought she was nobody. He didn't know that the woman trembling before him wasn't a victim. She was the trap. And soon, when the bailiff screams, "All rise," Barrett Langford is going to realize that he just assaulted the one person on earth with the power to end his life. This is the story of how arrogance met absolute justice. The air conditioning in the Jefferson County Federal Courthouse was broken again, leaving the hallway smelling of stale floor wax, nervous sweat, and cheap cologne. It was the kind of heat that made tempers short and patience thin. Moving through the crowd like a shark in a wading pool was Sergeant Barrett Langford, 6'4" with a buzz cut that showed off the scar running above his right ear. Barrett didn't walk. He patrolled. Even here, off-duty in civilian clothes, he wore his arrogance like a badge. He was wearing a tight polo shirt that strained against his biceps, the kind of guy who took up 2 lanes of traffic just because he could. "I'm telling you, Garrick, it's a wash," Barrett said, speaking loudly into his phone, not caring who heard him. He laughed, a barking sound that made a passing paralegal flinch. "Internal Affairs has nothing. The dashcam footage was corrupted. You know how it goes. Technical difficulties." He winked at a security guard who looked away uncomfortably. Barrett Langford had a reputation in the 4th Precinct. They called him the Hammer because when Barrett showed up, things got broken. Suspects fell downstairs. Evidence disappeared. Cameras malfunctioned. And he had skated by on intimidation and the blue wall of silence. Today was supposed to be his victory lap. A federal inquiry into his unit's conduct regarding the disappearance of narcotics money was scheduled for a preliminary hearing. But Barrett wasn't worried. He sat at the defense table next to his lawyer, Kendrick Sloan. Sloan was a slippery man in a $3,000 suit, known for getting cops off the hook. "Where's Judge Hale?" Barrett whispered, leaning over. "He's usually on the bench by now." Sloan shuffled some papers, looking slightly annoyed. "Clerk said there was a last-minute substitution. Hale had a family emergency." Barrett frowned. "Substitution? Who did we get? Whitaker Harper?" "Unclear," Sloan said, "but don't worry. The prosecution's case relies on the testimony of a junkie and a missing ledger. We're golden. Just try to look professional." Barrett leaned back, stretching his arms over the back of the bench. He scanned the gallery. He saw the weeping mother of the kid he'd framed. He saw the Internal Affairs rat, Detective Ronan Kane, sitting in the back row. Barrett locked eyes with Kane and smirked. "You can't touch me," the smirk said. He felt invincible. He was the predator in the tank. He replayed the moment in the hallway in his mind, the satisfying sound of the jacket tearing. It felt good to assert dominance right before the trial. It got his blood pumping. "All rise." The bailiff's voice boomed through the room. The rustling of clothes filled the air as people stood up. The side door behind the bench opened. Barrett buttoned his suit jacket, puffing out his chest. He prepared to give the judge his best, humble, public servant nod. But the figure that emerged from the chambers wasn't the elderly, stooped figure of Judge Hale. It was a woman. She moved with a terrifying grace, her black judicial robes flowing around her like storm clouds. She didn't look at the gallery. She walked straight to the high-backed leather chair, placed a stack of files on the bench, and stood there for a moment, surveying the room. Barrett blinked. There was something familiar about the way she held her head, something familiar about the set of her jaw. She looked down at the defense table. "Be seated," she said. The voice, Barrett's stomach dropped. It felt like he had swallowed a stone. He knew that voice. He had heard it. "You have made a grave error in judgment, Sergeant." He squinted. The judge wasn't wearing the reading glasses now, and she was wearing the robe, which hid her clothes. But as she sat down, she reached into the pocket of her robe and pulled out a pair of thick-rimmed glasses. She slid them onto her nose. Then she looked directly at Barrett Langford. It was her, the woman from the hallway. Barrett felt the blood drain from his face so fast it made him dizzy. He grabbed his lawyer's arm. "Sloan," Barrett hissed, his voice trembling. "We have a problem." "Quiet," Sloan whispered. "She's reading the docket." "The Honorable Judge Seraphina Voss presiding," the bailiff announced. Sloan froze. He whipped his head around to look at Barrett. "Voss? Did he say Voss?" "Who is she?" Barrett whispered, sweat breaking out on his forehead. "She's not a local judge," Sloan hissed, panic entering his eyes. "She's from the federal circuit. The Department of Justice sends her in when they think the local judges are compromised. They call her the guillotine." "Barrett, why is she looking at you like that?" Courtroom 4B was packed. The air was thick with the smell of old wood and high stakes. This was a high-profile suppression hearing. The allegations were that Barrett's unit, the Street Crimes Task Force, had been systematically shaking down drug dealers, stealing the cash, and planting evidence to cover their tracks. But Barrett wasn't worried. He sat at the defense table next to his lawyer, Kendrick Sloan. Sloan was a slippery man in a $3,000 suit, known for getting cops off the hook. "Where's Judge Hale?" Barrett whispered, leaning over. "He's usually on the bench by now." Sloan shuffled some papers, looking slightly annoyed. "Clerk said there was a last-minute substitution. Hale had a family emergency." Barrett frowned. "Substitution? Who did we get? Whitaker Harper?" "Unclear," Sloan said. "But don't worry. The prosecution's case relies on the testimony of a junkie and a missing ledger. We're golden. Just try to look professional." Barrett leaned back, stretching his arms over the back of the bench. He scanned the gallery. He saw the weeping mother of the kid he'd framed. He saw the internal affairs rat, Detective Ronan Kane, sitting in the back row. Barrett locked eyes with Kane and smirked. "You can't touch me," the smirk said. He felt invincible. He was the predator in the tank. He replayed the moment in the hallway in his mind, the satisfying sound of the jacket tearing. It felt good to assert dominance right before the trial. It got his blood pumping. "All rise." The bailiff's voice boomed through the room. The rustling of clothes filled the air as people stood up. The side door behind the bench opened. Barrett buttoned his suit jacket, puffing out his chest. He prepared to give the judge his best, humble, public servant nod. But the figure that emerged from the chambers wasn't the elderly, stooped figure of Judge Hale. It was a woman. She moved with a terrifying grace, her black judicial robes flowing around her like storm clouds. She didn't look at the gallery. She walked straight to the high-backed leather chair, placed a stack of files on the bench, and stood there for a moment, surveying the room. Barrett blinked. There was something familiar about the way she held her head, something familiar about the set of her jaw. She looked down at the defense table. "Be seated," she said. The voice, Barrett's stomach dropped. It felt like he had swallowed a stone. He knew that voice. He had heard it. "You have made a grave error in judgment, Sergeant." He squinted. The judge wasn't wearing the reading glasses now, and she was wearing the robe, which hid her clothes, but as she sat down, she reached into the pocket of her robe and pulled out a pair of thick-rimmed glasses. She slid them onto her nose. Then she looked directly at Barrett Langford. It was her, the woman from the hallway. Barrett felt the blood drain from his face so fast it made him dizzy. He grabbed his lawyer's arm. "Sloan," Barrett hissed, his voice trembling. "We have a problem." "Quiet," Sloan whispered. "She's reading the docket." "The Honorable Judge Seraphina Voss presiding," the bailiff announced. Sloan froze. He whipped his head around to look at Barrett. "Voss? Did he say Voss?" "Who is she?" Barrett whispered, sweat breaking out on his forehead. "She's not a local judge," Sloan hissed, panic entering his eyes. "She's from the federal circuit. The Department of Justice sends her in when they think the local judges are compromised. They call her the guillotine." "Barrett, why is she looking at you like that?" "Before we begin the matter of United States versus Langford et al.," Judge Voss said, her voice amplified by the microphone, calm and deadly, "I have a preliminary housekeeping matter to address regarding the conduct of the defendant." She reached under the bench. Barrett stopped breathing. Slowly, deliberately, Judge Voss pulled up a bundle of fabric. It was a denim jacket. The left sleeve was torn almost completely off, hanging by jagged threads. She laid the torn jacket on the bench right next to her gavel. It looked like a corpse on an autopsy table. "Mr. Sloan," Judge Voss said, her eyes never leaving Barrett's face. Sloan stood up, his legs shaking. Yes, Your Honor." "Your client," she said, gesturing to the jacket, "seems to have a difficulty with impulse control. In the hallway of this courthouse, he assaulted a woman who he believed was blocking his path. He tore this jacket from her body. He called her a welfare queen. He told her to get out of his face." A collective gasp went through the courtroom. The reporters in the front row began furiously typing on their laptops. "That woman," Judge Voss continued, her voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerously quiet, "was me." The silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was a vacuum, sucking the air out of everyone's lungs. Barrett Langford wanted to vanish. He wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole. He looked at the exit signs, calculating the distance, realizing he would never make it. "Your Honor," Sloan stammered, my client, surely there is a misunderstanding." "There is no misunderstanding, Counselor," Judge Voss cut him off. "I was carrying the unredacted files for this case, files I requested personally, because I had reason to believe evidence was being tampered with by the local precinct. When your client assaulted me, he knocked those files to the floor. I believe he referred to them as trash." She picked up a file from her desk. "This trash contains the internal communications logs between Sergeant Langford and the district attorney's office." Barrett's heart hammered against his ribs. The logs, the text messages where he bragged about planting the drug money. He thought those had been deleted. "Now," Judge Voss leaned forward. "Typically, a judge would recuse herself in a situation where she has become a victim of the defendant. It creates a conflict of interest." Sloan let out a breath of relief. "Yes, Your Honor. We move for immediate recusal and a mistrial. Clearly, you cannot be impartial." Judge Voss smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a wolf looking at a trapped rabbit. "I anticipated that motion, Mr. Sloan. However, under federal rule of criminal procedure, and given the special mandate granted to me by the Supreme Court for this specific corruption inquiry, I am not merely presiding as a judge. I am presiding as a special master of inquiry." She opened the file. Furthermore, the assault in the hallway was captured on the courthouse security cameras, as well as the body camera of the bailiff who was escorting me. A bailiff, Sergeant Langford, failed to notice because he was too busy admiring his own reflection. She pointed to a screen mounted on the wall. "Play it." The giant LCD screen flickered to life. The grainy but clear footage showed the hallway. It showed Barrett strutting. It showed him collide with her. It showed the shove, the rip, the sneer. The audio was crisp. I don't take orders from welfare queens. The courtroom erupted. People were booing. The mother of the victim in the back row screamed, "That's him! That's what he is!" Judge Voss banged her gavel once, a sharp crack that silenced the room. "Motion for recusal denied," she ruled. This incident speaks directly to the defendant's character, his volatility, and his sense of impunity, all of which are central to the charges of police brutality and corruption facing this court. The jacket stays on the bench as Exhibit A. She looked at Barrett. He was slumped in his chair, sweating through his expensive suit. "Now, Sergeant Langford," she said, "please stand up." Barrett couldn't move. His legs felt like lead. "Stand up," she commanded, her voice like a whip crack. Barrett scrambled to his feet, trembling. "You told me to see how far I'd get if I sued you," she said softly. "Mate, we aren't going to sue you, Sergeant. We are going to try you. And since you seem to enjoy tearing things apart, let's see what happens when we tear apart your alibi." She turned to the prosecutor, a young, sharp-looking woman named Lena Harlow, who looked like she had just won the lottery. "Ms. Harlow," the judge said, "call your first witness, and I believe you have some new evidence regarding the corrupted dashcam footage." Lena Harlow stood up, smiling. "Yes, Your Honor. It turns out the footage wasn't corrupted. It was just hidden. And thanks to the files you recovered from the trash in the hallway, we found the encryption key." Barrett looked at his partner, Cole. Cole wasn't looking at him. Cole was looking at the floor, inching his chair away from Barrett. The ship was sinking, and the rats were already swimming. "Wait," Barrett whispered to Sloan. "Do something." Sloan began packing his briefcase. "I can't do anything, Barrett. You assaulted a federal judge on tape before the trial even started. You're radioactive. I'm not losing my license for you. You can't leave me." "I'm not leaving," Sloan whispered back, cold and professional. "But I advise you to look at the prosecutor's table. Look who just walked in." Barrett looked. Walking through the gate was Officer Whitaker, the rookie from Barrett's unit. The kid Barrett had bullied into silence, the kid who knew where the bodies were buried. Whitaker sat down next to the prosecutor. He looked scared, but he looked determined. Judge Voss saw the look on Barrett's face. "Is there a problem, Sergeant?" she asked. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Barrett swallowed hard. No, Your Honor." "Good," she said, picking up a pen. "Because by the time we are done today, you are going to wish you were one." The air in the courtroom had shifted. It was no longer a trial. It was a dissection. Officer Whitaker, a young rookie with a face that looked like he hadn't slept in a week, sat in the witness box. His hands were shaking so badly that the plastic water cup in front of him rippled. "State your name and rank for the record," Prosecutor Harlow said. "Officer Thaddeus Whitaker, badge number 4922. Barrett Langford leaned forward at the defense table. He didn't say a word. He just stared. He locked eyes with the kid, channeling every ounce of menace he had cultivated on the force. It was the look that made drug dealers swallow their tongues. The look that said, "You rat, and you die?" Whitaker flinched, looking down at his lap. "Officer Whitaker." Judge Voss's voice cut through the air. She wasn't looking at the witness. She was looking at Barrett. Is something distracting you? Whitaker swallowed hard. No, Your Honor. Good, she said, her eyes narrowing behind those thick-rimmed glasses. Because if the defendant continues to attempt to intimidate a federal witness via facial expressions, I will have him shackled and blindfolded for the remainder of these proceedings. Do I make myself clear, Mr. Sloan? Barrett's lawyer, Kendrick Sloan, looked like he was trying to become invisible. Crystal clear, Your Honor. Mr. Langford, look at the wall. Barrett ground his teeth, turning his head away, the veins in his neck bulging. Officer Whitaker, Harlow continued, let's talk about the road on the warehouse in the meat-packing district. What happened? Whitaker took a deep breath. We breached the door. Sergeant Langford led the team. There were 3 suspects inside. They surrendered immediately, hands on heads, knees on the ground. And then Sergeant Langford ordered me to turn off my body camera. The jury murmured. Did you? Yes, Whitaker whispered. I was scared. He told me that rookies who don't listen get left behind in bad neighborhoods. And after the cameras were off, Whitaker started to cry, silent tears running down his face. He went to the back room. There was a safe. He cracked it. There was cash inside. A lot of it. Bundles of hundreds, maybe a lot. Did he log it into evidence? No, Whitaker said. He put half in his vest. He gave a bundle to Officer Cole. And then? Whitaker paused, his voice trembling. Then he took a drop gun out of his ankle holster, a snub-nosed .38 with the serial numbers filed off. He walked over to one of the suspects, a kid named Cassian Reed. He was young. The courtroom was dead silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to have stopped. He put the gun in Cassian's hand. Whitaker sobbed. He pressed his fingers against it to get prints, and then he kicked Cassian in the face and told him, "Congratulations, kid. You just bought a felony possession charge." Objection. Sloan stood up half-heartedly. Hearsay. Overruled, Judge Voss said instantly. Proceed. Officer Whitaker, the prosecutor said, walking over to the evidence table. Is this the gun? She held up a plastic bag containing a rusted revolver. Yes. And tell us, she said, turning to look at Barrett. Why are you coming forward now? Whitaker looked up. He looked at Barrett, who was staring at the wall, his jaw clenched. Then he looked at Judge Voss, sitting high on the bench, the torn denim jacket resting next to her like a flag of war. Because, Whitaker said, his voice gaining strength. In the locker room, I heard Sergeant Langford talking on the phone. He was laughing about how he was going to get away with it. He said the system was rigged for people like him. He said judges were just politicians in robes. Whitaker pointed a shaking finger at Barrett. And then I saw what he did in the hallway this morning. I saw him attack her honor, and I realized if he's willing to do that to a federal judge in broad daylight, he's going to kill me if I don't speak up. He's a monster. Barrett slammed his fist on the table. You lying little punk. Sit down. Judge Voss's voice boomed. It wasn't a request. It was a thunderclap. Mr. Langford, she said, her voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. You have already assaulted the court physically today. Do not assault it verbally. One more outburst, and your bail is revoked immediately. Barrett slumped back, fuming. But the damage was done. The blue wall of silence hadn't just cracked, it had shattered. The defense was in shambles. Sloan, the lawyer, looked like he was reconsidering his career choices. He leaned in to Barrett. Barrett, listen to me, Sloan whispered. We need to plead right now. I can maybe Maybe get you years if you allocute. If we go to verdict, she's going to bury you under the prison." Barrett looked at the jury. They looked disgusted. He looked at the judge. She looked impassive. But Barrett Langford was a narcissist. He didn't see reality. He saw a challenge. He truly believed he could talk his way out of this. He had charmed internal affairs before. He had charmed juries before. He was the hammer. "No," Barrett said. "Put me on the stand." Sloane's eyes widened. "Are you insane? That woman is a shark. She will eat you alive." "I can handle her," Barrett said, adjusting his tie. "She's just an angry woman with a grudge. I'll make the jury see that she's biased. I'll play the hard job, bad streets card. They love that." "Barrett, don't." "I'm taking the stand." Barrett Langford sat in the witness box. He sat tall, chest out, giving the jury his best weary protector of the city look. Under his own lawyer's questioning, he did well. He talked about the dangers of the job, the split-second decisions, the stress. He almost looked sympathetic. Then prosecutor Lena Harlow stood up to cross-examine. But before she could speak, Judge Voss raised a hand. "Ms. Harlow," the judge said, "I will be conducting the inquiry from this point forward." The room gasped. This was highly irregular, but as a special master of inquiry, fully within her rights. Judge Voss stood up. She didn't stay behind the bench. She walked down the steps, her black robes billowing. She walked until she was standing right in front of the witness box, eye to eye with Barrett Langford. She wasn't holding a notepad. She was holding the torn denim sleeve. "Sergeant Langford," she began, her tone conversational, almost polite. "You testified just now that you are a man of extreme discipline. Is that correct?" Barrett smiled, a charming, practiced smile. "Yes, Your Honor. You have to be in my line of work. And you testified that you only use force when you feel an imminent threat to your safety or the safety of others." "Correct. Absolutely. Officer safety is paramount." Judge Voss held up the sleeve. "When you tore this jacket from my body, did you feel threatened?" Barrett hesitated. The trap was obvious, but he had to answer. I felt obstructed, Your Honor. It was a tense morning." "Obstructed?" she repeated. "I am 5'4". You are 6'4". "I was holding paper. You were holding a latte. Did I have a weapon?" "No." "Did I verbally threaten you?" You were rude." "Rude?" Judge Voss said, stepping closer. "So, in your world, Sergeant, rudeness is a capital offense, punishable by physical assault." "I didn't assault you," Barrett blustered. "You moved me with enough force to rip industrial-grade denim," she countered. "Let's talk about Cassian Reed, the young boy you framed. Officer Whitaker said you kicked him in the face while he was handcuffed. Did Cassian Reed threaten you?" "Whitaker's a liar," Barrett spat. "The kid was resisting." "Resisting?" Judge Voss turned to the screen. "Exhibit C, the medical report." An image appeared on the screen. A young man's face, swollen, purple, unrecognizable. "Cassian Reed had a fractured orbital socket and a broken jaw," Judge Voss read. The medical examiner stated, "The force required to cause this injury is equivalent to being hit with a baseball bat or a steel-toed boot." She turned back to Barrett. "You wear steel-toed boots, don't you, Sergeant?" Barrett shifted his feet under the stand. "Standard issue." "You like to dominate, don't you, Mr. Langford?" She was relentless now, her voice rising. "You like to make people feel small. You like to remind them that you have the badge, and they have nothing." "I protect this city," Barrett yelled, his composure slipping. "You people sit in your ivory towers judging us. You don't know what it's like out there. The animals I deal with." "Animals?" Judge Voss interrupted, her voice ice cold. Is that what I was? An animal blocking your path. You were in my way, Barrett roared, standing up in the witness box, forgetting where he was. You were just some nobody standing in my way. I am the law. I don't move for people. People move for me. Silence. Absolute, ringing silence. Barrett froze. He realized what he had just screamed. He realized he was standing up, leaning over the railing, his face twisted in rage. He looked at the jury. They were recoiling, looking at him with pure fear. He looked at his lawyer. Sloan had his face buried in his hands. Judge Voss didn't flinch. She stood her ground, looking up at him with an expression of utter calm. Thank you, Sergeant, she said softly. You have just proved the prosecution's entire case. You may sit down. Barrett slumped into his chair, defeated. The energy had left him. He knew it was over. But Judge Voss wasn't done. The jury will disregard the defendant's outburst, she said, returning to the bench. However, before we proceed to closing arguments, there is one final piece of evidence from the files the defendant so kindly helped me sort in the hallway. She opened a red folder. While reviewing the decrypted phone logs obtained from Sergeant Langford's device, we found a recurring contact, a number listed only as the architect. Barrett's head snapped up. His eyes went wide with genuine terror. For the first time, he wasn't scared of jail. He was scared of them. No, Barrett whispered. Don't read that. The texts, Judge Voss continued, they detail payments, not just from drug busts, but payments to a specific offshore account. Payments made to ensure that certain investigations into the city council's zoning reallocations were diverted. The courtroom murmured. This wasn't just police brutality anymore. This was political corruption. Sergeant Langford? Judge Voss looked down. It appears you aren't just a bully. You are a bagman. You were planting drugs on residents of low-income housing blocks to get them evicted, weren't you? So the developers could buy the land cheap. I plead the fifth, Barrett screamed. I plead the fifth. You already waived your Fifth Amendment rights when you took the stand, Judge Voss said ruthlessly. Sit down. She turned to the bailiff. Secure the doors. No one leaves. Then she looked at the back of the courtroom. Sitting in the last row, trying to look inconspicuous, was a man in a gray suit. He had been there all day. Marshal. The judge pointed a long, black-sleeved finger at the man. Arrest that man! The man jumped up to run, but 3 bailiffs were on him in seconds. They tackled him to the ground. Who is that? Someone shouted. That, Judge Voss said, is Councilman Preston Gale, the man Sergeant Langford refers to as the architect in his texts, the man who ordered the hit on Cassie and Reed because the boys' family refused to sell their grocery store. The twist hit the room like a bomb. Barrett Langford wasn't the mastermind. He was the muscle. He had destroyed lives, framed kids, and terrorized a neighborhood. All to help a politician build a shopping mall. Barrett looked at Gale being cuffed. He looked at the judge. He realized the scope of her investigation. She hadn't just come for him. She had used him as the bait to catch the whale. She had let him act arrogant. She had let him think he was in control. She had even let him tear her jacket, all to get him into this room with those files to expose the whole rot. The jury deliberation room door remained shut for a short time. In the world of high-stakes federal criminal trials, a short time was a heartbeat. It was a terrifyingly short amount of time. It meant there was no debate. It meant there was no holdout juror arguing for leniency. It meant the evidence was so overwhelming, so grotesque, that 12 strangers had looked at each other and agreed immediately. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere had transformed from a legal proceeding into a funeral wake. The air was thick, heavy, and silent. Sergeant Barrett Langford sat at the defense table, but he was no longer the hammer. The adrenaline of his earlier outburst had drained away, leaving behind a cold, shaking dread. He stared at the mahogany table, tracing the grain of the wood with a trembling finger. For the first time, he wasn't thinking about how to spin the story. He wasn't thinking about which favor to call in. He was thinking about the walls of a cell. His lawyer, Kendrick Sloan, was packing his briefcase. It was a subtle motion, but Barrett caught it. Sloan was organizing his pens, closing his files, checking his watch. He was already checking out. He knew the ship had sunk. He was just waiting for the official time of death so he could leave. "They're coming back too fast, aren't they?" Barrett whispered, his voice cracking. He sounded like a child asking if the monsters were real. Sloan didn't look at him. He kept his eyes on the courtroom door. "In federal court? Fast as bad, Barrett. Fast as a landslide. If they had questions, they would have sent a note. There are no notes." Barrett felt the bile rise in his throat. He looked back at the gallery. The seats were full, but the faces had changed. The supporters, the other cops from the precinct who had filled the front rows earlier, were gone. They had vanished the moment the text messages about the architect were read. The blue wall had not only crumbled, it had evaporated. In their place remained the people Barrett had spent a career tormenting, the mothers of sons he had locked up, the shopkeepers he had shaken down, and right in the center, staring at him with eyes that burned like coals, was Mrs. Reed, the mother of the boy whose face Barrett had smashed into the concrete. "All rise." The bailiff's voice was sharper this time, less ceremonial, more final. The door to the jury room opened. The 12 jurors filed out. They walked with a solemn, heavy gait. Not a single one of them looked at the defense table. They looked at the floor. They looked at the judge. They looked at the flag. But they refused to look at Barrett Langford. Judge Voss sat high on the bench. She had not moved during the recess. The torn denim jacket was still there, sitting next to her gavel like a silent witness. She watched the jury take their seats, her face a mask of stone. "Mr. Foreman," Judge Voss said. Her voice was calm, contrasting with the hurricane of tension in the room. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" The foreman, a retired mechanic with calloused hands and a stern face, stood up. He held the verdict sheet with both hands to keep it from shaking. "We have, Your Honor." "Publish the verdict." Barrett Langford stopped breathing. The world narrowed down to the foreman's mouth. "In the matter of the United States versus Barrett Langford," the foreman began, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "On count 1, racketeering and corruption under the RICO Act, we find the defendant guilty." Barrett flinched as if he'd been slapped. A gasp rippled through the gallery, but it wasn't shock. It was relief. On count 2, obstruction of justice, guilty. On count 3, perjury, guilty. On count 4, deprivation of rights under color of law, guilty. The guilties kept coming like hammer blows, like nails in a coffin. Count 5, count 6, count 7, conspiracy to distribute narcotics, aggravated assault. And on count 8, the foreman paused, looking up for the first time, looking directly at the weeping mother in the third row. Conspiracy to commit murder regarding the attack on Cassian Reed. We find the defendant guilty. The courtroom erupted. It wasn't a cheer. It was a release of pent-up agony. Mrs. Reed sobbed openly, collapsing into the arms of her daughter. The sound was raw, a mixture of grief and vindication that cut through the sterile air of the court. Judge Voss banged the gavel. "Bang, bang, bang! Order!" she commanded. "There will be order in this court." She waited until the silence returned. Then she turned her gaze to the defense table. "Kendrick Sloan," she said, "do you wish to poll the jury?" Sloan stood up slowly. He looked at Barrett, then back at the judge. "No, Your Honor. The defense waives polling." Barrett grabbed Sloan's sleeve. "What are you doing? Fight for me. Do something." Sloan pulled his arm away, disgusted. "It's unanimous on 8 counts. Barrett, it's over. Sit down." Judge Voss adjusted her glasses. "The court accepts the verdict. Judgment of conviction is entered. Now, typically, I would set a date for sentencing to allow for pre-sentencing reports." She paused, her eyes locking onto Barrett's terrified face. "However, given the nature of the crimes, the overwhelming evidence, and the defendant's own conduct in this very building today, I find that a pre-sentencing report is unnecessary. I have heard the testimony, I have seen the evidence, and I have personally experienced the defendant's character." She opened the file in front of her. "We will proceed to sentencing immediately." Barrett's heart hammered against his ribs. "Now, right now?" "Ms. Harlow," the judge said to the prosecutor, "the government may speak." Lena Harlow stood up. She didn't need notes. She walked to the center of the room. "Your Honor, Barrett Langford wore a badge. He was supposed to be the line between order and chaos. Instead, he was the chaos. He didn't just break the law, he sold it. He sold the safety of this community for cash and ego. He destroyed Cassian Reed's face and his future. He destroyed the trust this city places in its officers. The government asks for the maximum sentence." "Thank you," Judge Voss said. She looked past the lawyers. "Mrs. Reed, I see you in the gallery. Under the Crime Victims' Rights Act, you have the right to be heard before I pass sentence. Do you wish to speak?" Mrs. Reed stood up. She was a small woman, trembling with emotion, but she walked to the podium with a dignity that silenced the room. She gripped the wood, her knuckles white. She didn't look at the judge. She turned her body and looked directly at Barrett Langford. "You laughed," she said, her voice shaking. "My son told me that when you broke his jaw, you laughed." Barrett looked down at the table, unable to meet her eyes. "Look at me," she screamed, a sound so full of pain that the bailiffs took a step forward. Barrett slowly lifted his head. He saw the tears streaming down her face. "My boy wanted to be an architect," she whispered. "Now he can barely speak. He has nightmares where he screams, but no sound comes out. You took his voice. You took his smile. And for what? For a bonus, for a pat on the back from a crooked politician." She wiped her eyes. "You called yourself the Hammer. You thought you could crush us because we were poor, because we were black, because we didn't have power. But look around you, Mr. Langford. Look at where you are. You are in a cage now. And my son is free." She turned to the judge. "Lock him away, Your Honor. Lock him away until he forgets what sunlight looks like." Judge Voss nodded slowly. "Thank you, Mrs. Reed." Finally, the judge turned to Barrett. "Defendant Langford, you have the right of allocution. That means you can speak before I sentence you. Do you have anything to say?" Barrett stood up. His legs felt like jelly. He looked around the room, looking for a friendly face, looking for an exit, looking for a miracle. There was nothing, just the cold stare of the judge and the silent judgment of the room. Barrett stammered, "I was just doing my job." The streets are war zones. You don't understand. I had to be tough. If I wasn't tough, people got hurt." "You were the one hurting them," Judge Voss interrupted, her voice sharp. I made mistakes." Barrett tried to pivot, his voice taking on a desperate, pleading tone. "I'm sorry if anyone got hurt. I'm a good cop. I have citations. I have medals. Doesn't that count for anything? I dedicated my life to this city." Judge Voss listened. She waited until he trailed off, until his excuses ran dry. Then she leaned forward, resting her elbows on the high bench. "Mr. Langford," she began, her tone conversational but deadly. "Do you see this jacket?" She picked up the torn denim fabric again. "You encountered a woman in a hallway. You didn't see a judge. You didn't see a citizen. You saw an object, something to be moved, something to be discarded." She stood up, holding the jacket up for the entire court to see. "You tore this jacket because you believed you were untouchable. You believed that your badge gave you the right to occupy any space you chose, and that everyone else existed only by your permission. That is not the mindset of a good cop, Mr. Langford. That is the mindset of a tyrant." She dropped the jacket onto the bench. It landed with a soft thud that echoed like a gunshot. "You speak of your medals. You speak of your service. But let me tell you what I saw in the evidence today. I saw a predator. I saw a man who preyed on the vulnerable because it was easy. You didn't fight crime. You organized it. You didn't protect the weak. You sold them to the highest bidder." Judge Voss picked up a pen. "There is a concept in the law called breach of trust. It means that when a person in power commits a crime, it is worse than when a civilian does it. Because when you commit a crime, Mr. Langford, you murder the very idea of justice. You make people afraid of the ones they should run to for help." She looked him dead in the eye. "You wanted to know if I knew who you were. You asked me in the hallway, 'Do you know my name?'" She paused for effect. "Yes, I know your name. And now I am going to make sure history forgets it." She looked down at the sentencing sheet. "Barrett Langford, on the count of racketeering, I sentence you to years. On the count of civil rights violations, I sentence you to years. On the count of conspiracy to commit murder, I sentence you to years." Barrett's knees buckled. He grabbed the table to stay upright. "Years," he gasped. "I'll die in there." "These sentences," Judge Voss continued, her voice rising, overpowering his plea, "are to run consecutively. That is a total of years in the custody of the Federal Bureau of Prisons," she declared. "You will be ineligible for parole. You will serve every single day." "No!" Barrett screamed, the reality shattering his mind. "You can't do this. This is a setup. You're biased. I want a retrial." "There will be no retrial," Judge Voss said calmly. "And there is one last thing." She pointed to his chest, to the gold shield pinned to his suit jacket, the badge he had polished every morning, the source of his power, the source of his ego. "Bailiff," she commanded, "remove the defendant's badge." The two U.S. Marshals stepped forward. They were big men, bigger than Barrett. They didn't ask nicely. One of them grabbed Barrett's arms and twisted them behind his back, forcing him to bend over the defense table. "Get off me!" Barrett shouted, struggling, kicking out. "Don't touch me." The second marshal reached out. He grabbed the gold badge. He unlatched the pin. The sound of the pin clicking open was audible in the silence. The marshal pulled the badge off Barrett's suit. He held it up. It caught the light of the courtroom chandeliers. "Bring it here," Judge Voss said. The marshal walked up to the bench and placed the badge down. He placed it right next to the torn denim sleeve, the symbol of his authority and the symbol of his arrogance, side by side. "You are no longer Sergeant Langford," Judge Voss said, her voice final. "You are inmate number 89402. You have no rank. You have no authority. You are just a man who owes a debt to society that you will spend the rest of your natural life paying." She slammed the gavel down. One final thunderous crack that signaled the end of Barrett Langford's life as he knew it. "This court is adjourned." "Take him away," the marshal ordered. "No, no." Barrett was sobbing now, a guttural, ugly sound. The fight had left him, replaced by the terrified realization of his future. The marshals hauled him up. They slapped steel cuffs on his wrists, the same cuffs he had used on thousands of people. They dragged him toward the side door, the prisoner's exit. As they dragged him past the gallery, Barrett looked at the faces. He saw Mrs. Reed. She wasn't looking at him with hate anymore. She was looking at him with pity. That hurt more than the hate. He was nothing to her now. He was just trash being taken out. He looked back at the bench one last time. Judge Voss was standing. She had removed her glasses. She was watching him be dragged away, her expression unreadable. She didn't look triumphant. She looked like a surgeon who had just cut out a tumor, exhausted but satisfied that the patient would survive. As the heavy steel door slammed shut behind Barrett, cutting off his screams, a profound silence settled over the courtroom. Judge Voss looked down at the bench. She picked up the badge. She looked at it for a moment, then dropped it into a metal evidence bin. Then she picked up her torn jacket. She folded the denim carefully, smoothing out the ripped fabric. She placed it into her briefcase. She looked at the gallery, gave a small, respectful nod to Mrs. Reed, and then turned and walked into her chambers, her black robes flowing behind her. The hammer was gone, but the justice remained. Barrett Langford thought he was untouchable because he had power, but he forgot the most important rule of the jungle. You never know who you're dealing with until it's too late. He judged a book by its cover, and that book turned out to be the penal code that put him away for life. Justice isn't always swift, and it isn't always pretty. But on that hot morning in the federal courthouse, karma didn't just knock on the door. It kicked it down. If you believe that arrogance deserves to be punished and that no one is above the law, hit that like button right now. It helps us share these stories of justice with the world. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story where the bully finally gets what's coming to them. Tell me in the comments, do you think years was enough for Barrett Langford or did he deserve more? I'll see you in the next video. Stay safe and stay.